everyone. My name is Medha and I am 22. My pronouns are she, her. I have both ADHD and ASD, so I decided to write this presentation about flourishing in otherness, which basically explores the positive outcomes from always being the other. I decided to hand draw some of the slides for this presentation, so I really hope you enjoy the illustrations. So without further ado, I begin today by acknowledging the Darug people, the traditional custodians of the land in which I speak today. I pay my respect to elders past, present, and emerging, and I extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. A lot of autistic people feel a little bit different to everyone else. The best description I can think of is when Hannah Gatsby said in her Netflix show, Douglas, being autistic is like being the only sober person in a room full of drunks. Everyone else is on a different wavelength that you can't quite key into. This quote really hit home for me personally because I've always felt different. As a young, queer, autistic woman of color from an immigrant family, until I met other autistic groups, I never really fit in anywhere. I was always an other. So before we go any further, what do I mean by other? What am I comparing it to? Well, the default person is a straight, white, neurotypical, able-bodied man. If you've never thought about it before, think about how we call them CEOs and then female CEOs. How we never ask people where they're from unless they look ethnic somehow. How gay and trans people have to come out as gay or trans because until they say anything, everyone just sort of assumes the rest of us are straight and cisgender. It's because in the back of our minds, we see all of these labels as different to what their idea of the normal person is. So me being who I am meant that my appearance, my behaviors, my lifestyle were all very different from this idea of normal. Just by existing, I alienated the people around me whenever I hung out in like mainstream communities. And so what happened is that I started spending more and more of my time in fringe groups, outcast groups. These are groups that are mainly dominated by immigrants, queer people, women, disabled people. And honestly, it's spending so much time with these influences in these communities that has really helped me flourish. They taught me how to accept my differences instead of trying to hide them. They taught me how to change my perspective so that I see my own strengths instead of being ashamed of my weaknesses. This shift from self-flagellation about everything that I couldn't do to figuring out who I am and how to appreciate the things I can do has really helped to put me on the pathway of growing into a version of myself that I can be proud of. So here are three big things that I learned from these groups and communities that are all considered other. The first thing, nothing is a race. Mainstream culture is really set on this imaginary schedule of life. You've got to graduate, get married, get a job, have children, all in these really tight age brackets where it's socially acceptable. If I didn't manage to do these things on time, what does that mean for me? That I'm a failure and I should feel bad. I really believed that I had to do this, and I kept trying to tick off all of these boxes as soon as I could. But once I started uni, I started spending a lot more time in queer spaces, and through them, I met the disability community. A lot of queer people never realize their identity until much later on in life. And so they end up restarting their adolescent years of rediscovery as soon as they come out of the closet. They have to relearn their relationship with themselves and with the world around them. And this means throwing out this imaginary schedule out the window. When I spent time with this community, I was surrounded by these compassionate messages telling me that it's okay to take my time. I can restart everything from scratch or um, go backwards along the schedule, and things will still turn out okay. All this pressure about doing things on time was not based on anything factual or real. And in order to live out the holistic life that I want for me, I need to reflect more on what sort of pathway would suit me. What would how should I mold my own life schedule? Marriage, degrees, none of these milestones are compulsory or time-based. Shedding this expectation to conform was the first step in many that really helped me flourish. So that's about big picture stuff. But what about a smaller scale, day-to-day living? I've always been taught that getting up early, setting up a daily routine, and seizing the day is the best way to live. Every motivational poster, piece of movie advice, self-help book teach me that if I want to be happy or successful, I have to get up early and start being productive from the very start of the day. The flip side of this message that I internalized was that if I'm not able to get up on time, if I'm not able to stick to a routine, I'm doomed to be unsuccessful and unhappy. I thought that this lifestyle was the only valid way to live a positive life. Well, this is what I thought until I talked to people in the disability community. A lot of disabled people aren't always able to get up with the sunrise and go straight into productivity for a lot of different reasons. Sometimes they end up staying in bed until 3 p.m. because honestly, they felt like shit all morning. But this doesn't mean they get nothing done all day. It just means that they start their day at 3 p.m. and make up for the lost time. The idea that your morning is what sets your momentum for the day is something that helps some people, but it leaves out the fact that I can reset the momentum of the day at any hour. Nothing is a race. I don't need to scramble to get my to-do list done as quickly as possible. I can get up at any time of the day and be just as productive as an early riser would. Learning to be nice to myself when I couldn't stick to these morning routines was really a game changer. I understand now that sometimes I have to rest a lot longer than my peers, but it's not wasting time. It's giving my body and mind the rest that it clearly needs. Being autistic means that I work differently. So it's not important if I spend extra time doing nothing or resting. What's important is that when I do have the energy, it I I make the most of it. As soon as I stop spending all of my evening energy feeling guilty about the first half of the day, I was able to invest it into things that actually mattered to me, things that actually helped me, like maybe it's getting some work done or just reaching out to a friend. So to summarize, I learned that I need to take my time in doing things, both on a larger scale and a smaller scale, and stop comparing myself to other people's schedules. There's no proper way to live my life. And so there's no point in holding myself to standards that are set by other people. The second thing that I want to talk about is that it's okay to have extra needs or be sensitive. I feel like there's a big emphasis on being tough and low maintenance. You see it in the movies all the time. There's these big, strong characters who push through all of their pain to save the day. You see on TV shows that there are characters who are high maintenance, and those characters are made fun of and or end up causing all sorts of drama because of their emotions. I internalized the idea that being emotional, getting overwhelmed by things, or having extra needs somehow makes me a burden or weak. Communities led by women really changed this for me. A lot of feminist activists have brought attention to how people talk about women and their emotions as high maintenance, as a way to complain about them. But see, emotional comfort is something that everyone needs. So why is it something to be ashamed of? Feminists have proudly been advocating the message that expressing emotion is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of being human. When you look at it logically, which I prefer to do as an autistic, being able to express your feelings is not weak. It's a sign of emotional intelligence, and it makes you a lot more likely to have empathy. A similar negative impression that I used to hold was that my sensory issues, my need for daily medication, my chronic fatigue, they all made me more of a burden on the people around me and, more weak. I felt bad that I wasn't able to be one of those tough people who can, live through anything, and that I had to ask for concessions for a lot of scenarios. The truth is, though, that my family and friends don't care about any of that. The people closest to me still love me, whether or not I have those needs. They're more than happy to help me with these things. So, whether my needs are emotional, physical, or both, I had influences telling me that there's nothing wrong with them. The disability and the feminist community had taught me that the narrative that being tough makes you better simply isn't true. Everyone has individual needs, and everyone requires support from others. I was hypersensitive to how often mine came up, but other people didn't see that as unusual or burdensome. I eventually applied this philosophy to myself as well. I'd often ignored my own fatigue and discomfort in situations where I didn't like the fact that I felt I needed those extra concessions. For example, if I went out into a crowd and I went into sensory overload because of the amount of people bumping into me, I wouldn't take myself out of the situation. I would push through it and then have to rest at home for 3 days to recover from the experience. This was not a healthy way to treat myself. Once I accepted my own needs, I was better at prioritizing my stamina for things important to me, instead of wasting it because I didn't look after my own individual requirements. I now love myself for being emotional because it makes me very empathetic. I don't feel the need to come off as tough, and I accept support when I need it. I ask for the concessions I need for my special needs because they're not something that I'm embarrassed of anymore. It's these minority communities that help me accept that my needs are just a part of me. The third and final thing that I'm going to talk about today is that a lot of people are just never going to like me, but it's not something I should take personally. I've always come off as a little bit strange throughout my life. I remember in primary school, I would try and hide my Indianness because, if I ever accidentally spoke with an accent, like an Indian accent, or when people saw my lunch of Indian food, they'd make fun of me for being weird. I recently read a book by Zosha Zaks that young women tend to build their identities and self-worth off of their relationships with other people around them. It's why it's really important to them that they're accepted in their social circles. Now, this makes it really difficult for autistic women because one of the main characteristics of autism is that we don't always understand the social rules. So we make a lot of social blunders and often don't manage to fit in. I tried for so many years to do this, but somehow every time I would do something wrong, I'd make a social mistake and fail at my performance of normal. I was trying so hard, but why couldn't I get people to like me? Well, I found a community that learned to be true to themselves, even if some people aren't too welcoming of them. The queer groups that I joined, especially the ones led by queer people of color, were open, loving, and they were based on this principle that it's okay to do and be whatever you want as long as you're not hurting anyone. They told me that some people won't accept my identity, but that's their problem, not mine. I need I needed to stop trying to get narrow-minded people to accept me and instead just make new friends with people who are more open-minded. For example, if I didn't like small talk and I instead just wanted to talk about the social lives of whales for a bit, that's fine. If I wanted to date or marry people of any gender, that wasn't an issue. Or if in a group conversation, rather than directly contribute to what's being said and discuss the sociological implications of a lot of the topics, people in these groups didn't mind. While a lot of normal people that I know would have judged me for being weird in these scenarios, people in the queer and autistic communities just accepted me and embraced my weirdness. It turns out that the judgment I get for not being normal is something I had to learn to ignore instead of take personally. Reframing all of my weirdness as personality traits rather than personality flaws is really what helped me rebuild my self-esteem and pursue social interactions that were positive experiences for me. I now know that it doesn't matter that some people aren't going to like me because it won't affect the positive relationships that I have with the people close to me. And it also won't affect the positive relationship that I now have with myself. Before I end this presentation, I just want to iterate that being in a marginalized minority is a very difficult thing to experience, especially when you're in more than one minority group. I am not at all trying to take away from all the struggle that is involved with this or trying to romanticize being discriminated against. I just want to say that being a minority, being an other, is not all bad because you get to learn an alternate way to see and experience the world. I wanted to highlight the positive aspects of these different worldviews that helped me flourish as a person, especially as an autistic person. The multiple perspectives on how to live life and overcome disabilities that I've seen in these disabled, queer, immigrant, and feminist communities have taught me that even though the society we're in was not really built for me, I can still reconstruct what's around me to cater to my own attributes. I would also like to add that it is really tough to change your thinking patterns and change how you see the world on your own. So I owe a lot of my emotional growth to my therapist of 5 years. Being an other is hard. A lot of us autistics know this from first-hand experience, but there are so many positive experiences that we get from being a part of communities that are labeled as divergent. Our strengths are intensified when we see our differences from various viewpoints, rather than just one outdated, narrow-minded perspective. Learning from diverse communities is vital for everyone to flourish. And for me specifically, it's these minority communities that helps me navigate the world as an autistic.